Shalom, Esther Gidui-Ewart. It's Thursday, June 30th. This is Africa 54.
The remains of former Democratic Republic of Congo Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba arrives at a burial ceremony. Officials and dignitaries pay their final respects in Kinshasa on the 62nd anniversary of the country's independence. R&B singer R.Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison for sexual abuse, marking the end of a sordid, stunning fall for the multi-platinum artist, who at 55 could spend the rest of his life behind bars. And China looks to boost its African imports to address massive trade deficits with the continent.
A United Nations envoy in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is warning that the M23 rebel group activities in eastern DRC is threatening to reverse hard-won progress in security and stability in the region. VOA's Paul Ndiho reports.
Public pressure is mounting, and the Congolese citizens are calling on their government to act. They accuse Rwanda of supporting M23 rebels that wreaked havoc in the eastern part of the country. Rwanda is denying those accusations. Briefing the Security Council on Wednesday, Bentu Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General for the DRC and head of MONUSCO, said the security situation in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is getting out of control.
Sadly, the security situation in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo deteriorated a lot, notably in reason of the intensification of the March 23rd movement attacks against the civilian population, the national security forces, and the peacekeepers of the MONUSCO, as well as attacks by ADF and other armed groups' attacks in Ituri and North Kivu.
During the most recent attacks, Akita said that the M23 behaved more like a conventional army than an armed group. The M23 has increasingly sophisticated firepower and equipment, especially in terms of long-range mortar and machine gun firing capabilities, as well as a precision fire on aircraft. The threat this represents for the population and the blue helmets mandated to protect it is obvious.
The M23 continue its well-coordinated attacks against FRDC and MONUSCO. With increasing conventional capabilities, the mission may find itself confronted by a threat that goes beyond its current capabilities.
Also speaking at the Security Council was George Nzongola Ntalaja, the DRC permanent representative of the United Nations. He says the Congolese citizens are not convinced that MONUSCO's highest priority is civilian protection.
Les citoyens congolais ne sont pas convaincus.
In the DRC, Congolese citizens are not convinced that MONUSCO's highest priority is civilian protection. So, MONUSCO must work on this aspect. A stronger offensive position is also called for. If MONUSCO cannot impose itself as a dissuasive force on the ground, it will struggle to carry out its mission and civilian protection. Earlier this month, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, the current chairman of the East African Community, welcomed the leaders of the 7 nations to discuss the security situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The meeting was attended by Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, Rwandan President Paul Kagame, President of Burundi Evariste Ndayishimiye, South Sudanese President Salva Kiir, and Felix Tshisekedi, the President of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Rwandan government has repeatedly and vehemently denied accusations over the years that it supports the M23. The rebel group rose to prominence a decade ago when its fighters seized Goma the largest city in Congo's east, which sits along the border with Rwanda. Earlier this month, M23 rebels claimed control of a key town of Bunagana, forcing thousands to flee their homes. Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
Thursday is a bittersweet and emotional day in the Democratic Republic of Congo. A coffin containing the remains of independence hero Patrice Lumumba was enshrined in a mausoleum in Kinshasa in a ceremony hosted by President Felix Tshisekedi, coinciding with the country's 62nd anniversary. Topped by a large statue of Lumumba, the mausoleum is located on a main avenue of the capital, which also bears his name. A single tooth is all that remains of the young nationalist who was murdered in January 1961 at the age of 35, just months after becoming Congo's first post-colonial prime minister. The ceremony marks the end of a 9-day pilgrimage that has retraced the highlights of Patrice Lumumba's life in the Democratic Republic of Congo. For more on the interment of Patrice Lumumba on Thursday, journalist Anastasia Tudish joins me live via Skype from Kinshasa. Hello, Anastasia.
Hi, Esther.
Give us some highlights on today's ceremony remembering and honoring Patrice Lumumba.
Well, Esther, today was a special day. You know, it's a holiday because it's, as you mentioned, National Independence Day. So it usually is a holiday, and people use that day to rest, visit family, and walk. But today, thousands of people were gathered along the avenues, the main avenues in Kinshasa, especially the Lumumba Avenue, to waiting to see the remains, the coffin, passing by. And so the first part of the day, from 9 a.m., let's say, to 12, people were really reminding themselves of who he was and were pretty calm and quiet, which is unusual for Congolese people. And after the remains passed, joy and laughter and dancing started.
And moments ago, Anastasia, you had a rare opportunity to speak to the daughter of Lumumba. What's her name and what did you talk to her about?
Yes, Esther, Juliana Lumumba was kind enough to receive us at her place, actually Patrice Lumumba's house on Boulevard du 30 Juin. And she told me that she was really, she felt really good that the government celebrated her father's memory that way. She really felt that he was honored. She also expressed her surprise to see youngster, and I can confirm that. I've spoke to people who were 25, 30, and who actually really related to his fight for a free and a better Congo, a better country. And so she feels proud and happy that the country celebrated her father that way. She also says that lots of questions remain unsolved because, of course, the remains were given back to DRC, but we still do not have assassins' names, whether on the Congolese side or on the Belgian side. But she also said that she felt at peace because as Africans, it's very important for us to take care of the remains or of the corpse of your parent. And she feels like she has done that. And she's also done that for her mother, who all her life was the widow of a man who she didn't really know what happened to.
Did you feel like the daughter of Lumumba feel like the whole family now can have a sort of a closure on their father's death?
I can tell you that, yes. She said that this was not a time for mourning anymore. It was a time for joy and also to look into her father's legacy, especially in the context that you mentioned earlier in the newscast. She mentioned that her father's legacy and her father's word about unity, about building a stronger DRC, about using your freedom as a man, a Congolese person, to build a better country are now at use and are more accurate than ever.
Anastasia, thank you so much. Journalist Anastasia Tudish reporting live via Skype from Kinshasa. For analysis on DRC historic day-to-day, I'm joined live via Skype from Laurel, Maryland by Ntal Alimasi, a governance and anti-corruption specialist. Mr. Almasi, welcome again to Africa 54.
Thank you, Esther.
Give us a sense of, the symbolism of today in Congo, given there have been two very major events happening in your native country.
Well, today seems like what we call the culmination of a long period of mourning. As Anastasia pointed out, in the African culture, after the death of a person, until you bury them, you're still in mourning. So for 62 years, for 61 years, the Congolese people, and especially the family, didn't have that sense of closure. Now, with that sense of closure comes questions. 62 years of independence, what does that mean for the Congo? Patrice Lumumba is known for having said in August of 1960, I believe that was the first Pan-African meeting in Kinshasa, that political independence that is not accompanied by economic and social development means nothing, makes no sense. And I think that today, it's his words actually make an exclamation point to what Congolese are feeling. They are asking themselves, where are we? Why are we still in the situation, in the social conditions that we live in? But at the same time, there's that big question you talked about in the first segment about the M23. Curiously enough, we are at the point where we know that 11 days after independence, there was the secession of Katanga by Moise Chombe. And, surprise, surprise, here we are celebrating the independence and bemoaning the escalation of troubles in the East by the M23. Back then it was Belgium that was supporting the, the rebels, the secessionists. Today it's Rwanda. Many people put the West behind it. So to me, it's just like the situation has come full circle.
If you would put in one sentence, what should the younger people be told about Patrice Lumumba?
The young people in the Congo at this point actually, and really allow me to come and make a parenthesis. Many people think that today's ceremony could have been preceded by all these 8 days, reflections on what Lumumba was, on national TV, on the radio, etc. And so for people today, many of them actually, they bemoan Lumumba, but they don't really know exactly what he stood for. They combat, the struggle that was his.
Ntal, thank you very much for your insight. Ntal Alimasi is a governance and anti-corruption specialist and a native of the DRC. Large crowds of protesters in Sudan faced tear gas and water cannons amid a communications blackout on Thursday as they staged a major round of rallies against the country's military leadership. It was the first time in months that internet and phone services had been cut. Bridges over the Nile between Khartoum and its twin cities of Omdurman and Bahri was also closed by security forces, another step typically taken on major protest days to limit the movement of marchers. The protests mark the third anniversary of massive demonstrations during the 2019 uprising that overthrew longtime autocratic ruler Omar al-Bashir and led to a power-sharing arrangement between civilian groups and the military. History was made a short time ago in the United States as Ketanji Brown Jackson, 51, was sworn in as U.S. Supreme Court Justice. She is the first black woman on the nation's top judicial body and just third black person to serve on the Supreme Court. She joined it at a time when the conservative majority has flexed its muscles in major rulings. Jackson becomes part of the liberal bloc of a court with a 6-3 conservative majority. Her swearing in as President Joe Biden's replacement for retiring liberal Justice Stephen Breyer comes only 6 days after the court overturned the 1973 Roe v. Wade landmark that legalized abortion nationwide. Multi-platinum R&B singer R.Kelly has been sentenced to 30 years in prison following his conviction for exploiting his stardom and wealth over decades to lure women and underage girls for sex. Lisa Bernard reports.
R.Kelly is a predator.
R&B singer R. Kelly was sentenced to 30 years in prison for sexual abuse, marking the end of a sordid, stunning fall for the multi-platinum artist, who at 55 could spend the rest of his life behind bars. The sentence was imposed 9 months after Kelly was convicted of racketeering and sex crimes, which included luring women and underage girls into his orbit for sex. Federal prosecutor Breon Peace.
With the aid of his fame, his money, and most importantly, his inner circle, R. Kelly preyed upon children and young women for his own sexual gratification for decades. He continued committing his crimes for almost 30 years and avoided punishment until today.
The sentencing came after several accusers, some of them tearful, told the judge about how Kelly promised to mentor them and help them attain stardom, only to subject them to degrading sexual treatment and physical harm. Lizette Martinez was among them.
Today was a very special but hard day for us. I personally, this happened to me a long time ago. I was 17, I'm 45 today. I never thought that I would be here to see him be held accountable for the atrocious things that he did to children.
Prosecutors had asked for more than 25 years, arguing he showed a callous disregard for his victims and showed no remorse. Kelly's lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean, said the singer would appeal.
For us, it's just the beginning of the fight, frankly.
Kelly did not speak during Wednesday's hearing, but has repeatedly denied sexual abuse accusations. He will likely be transported soon to a jail in Chicago, where he faces an August trial in federal court on child pornography and obstruction charges. He also faces various state charges in Illinois and Minnesota.
Lisa Bernard of Reuters filed that report. After decades of lending billions to Africa to build railroads, power plants, and highways, China now wants to boost its African imports to address massive trade deficits with the continent. This is an insightful story about how attempts by African countries to ramp up exports of food and agricultural products have fared since Beijing's shift in stance last November. Clara Frank has more.
As workers poke avocados from the treetops in an orchard owned by Kenyan agriculture firm Kakuzi, its managers revel in the thought that some might soon go to the crown jewel of emerging consumer markets, China. Kenya struck an export deal with China for fresh avocados in January, after years of lobbying for market access.
Fortunately for us as Kakuzi, we were already doing the things that were a requirement from the Chinese market. Things like monitoring the pest and controlling the pest, having data, all the things that were in that requirement we were already doing. So for us, it was not a hard thing to do. It was paying off for us for the things that we have always done.
But so far, no shipments have left. While 10 avocado exporters have passed Kenyan inspections, China now wants to do its own audits. It could take a decade to get the green light. Ramping up agricultural exports is one of the few options many African countries must use to rebalance the trade relationships with China and earn the hard currency they need to service mountains of debt, much of it owed to Beijing. Take Kenya. Its annual trade deficit with China is about $6.5 billion, and it has roughly $8 billion of Chinese debt. It needs nearly $631 million to service that debt this year, but that's almost 3 times its exports to China in 2021. Many African nations now say they simply cannot afford more Chinese loans and must boost exports to China. In recognition of the need to address the imbalances, or at least to stop them getting worse, China announced a shift in strategy in November. At a China-Africa summit, President Xi Jinping announced a host of initiatives to boost China's imports from Africa to $300 billion over the next 3 years. In theory, agriculture is one of the most promising avenues. China is the world's biggest food importer, while the agricultural sector in Africa is both the leading employer and contributor to economic activity. But for $148 billion of Chinese goods shipped to Africa in 2021, China imported only $106 billion, and 5 resource-rich nations, Angola, Congo Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo, South Africa, and Zambia, accounted for $75 billion of that. Chinese customs data shows that more than 3/4 of African nations have trade deficits with Beijing. When it comes to food and agriculture, China's imports were worth $13 billion 2 decades ago. By 2020, they had leaped to $161 billion, but Africa only accounted for 2.6% of that. Some countries are still struggling to take advantage of opportunities, such as Kenya. Eric Were at the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service said they had jumped through hoops to get 10 avocado companies cleared this year for Chinese exports.
The requirements differ a little bit. Like for EU, we do not require to go and do the orchard inspection. We only do the exit inspection. But now for the Chinese, we need to do the orchard, we need to do the pack house, and we need a fumigation facility. For the EU, we only do the exit inspection, and maybe sometimes we only check for the pack house to see whether the pack house is still maintaining the required standards.
Last month, the inspectorate announced the Chinese authorities had decided to conduct their own audits. Experts say Beijing could negotiate broad trade deals with African countries and regional blocs, as the EU does. Instead, China continues to do bilateral deals, and even then only on individual products. Clara Frank, VOA News.
Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. In Friday's entertainment report, Heather Maxwell features award-winning Kora virtuoso Sona Jabaret. And still to come, efforts to cut the red tape and expand inter-African trade. We'll have a report from Ivory Coast.
Empowerment and humanity towards a better world.
Economic and social progress of every society.
Facts and information from key players rather than spectators in politics, business, science and technology.
City, rural, educated, all underprivileged. We care and we listen to what matters to you.
Your voices are our voices.
You're watching Africa 54 from the Voice of America here in Washington, D.C. In other African news, the United Nations Security Council has voted to extend its peacekeeping mission in Mali for at least 1 more year. Tanzania has started a process of interrogating refugees living in the Duta refugee camp on the issue of repatriation. After 2 years of war, the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan forces are showing a willingness to come to the negotiating table. And in Kenya, mobile phone buyers are facing increased prices with a new tariff on the gadgets taking effect on Friday. The African Continental Free Trade Area has been operating for more than a year with the aim of cutting red tape to expand inter-African trade and lift millions of people out of poverty. But the largest trade pact in the world in terms of member countries has seen slow progress and mixed results. Anzoaku reports from Abidjan, Ivory Coast, in this report narrated by Moki Edwin Kinzeka.
The president of Cameroon's Professional Transporters Network, Moise Vokeng, has been trucking goods to Chad and the Central African Republic for more than 10 years. It's never been easy, he says, adding that the African Continental Free Trade Area in place since January 2021 hasn't made any noticeable improvement. Vokeng says African countries have been slow to cut bureaucracy and improve poor transport links.
We find it difficult to cross our borders. When you leave Douala in Cameroon for the Central African Republic, I can't count the difficulties we have in dealing with the Gurai-Bulai Road, then Boam to CAR. The same goes for access to Chad. There are so many requirements that we realize that free trade is not yet effective.
The World Bank says 84% of African trade is with partners outside Africa. The World Bank says once implemented, the duty-free continent-wide deal will boost intra-African trade, create jobs, and lift 10 million Africans out of extreme poverty. Bank's chief economist of Africa spoke on continental free trade agreement as an African
to leave the African continent to work to better connect Africa in terms of infrastructure.
Pan-African companies say improving intra-African trade is a challenge that offers great potential for economic independence.
There is a need for Africa to develop a form of autarky in the positive sense of being less dependent on the rest of the world for their own consumption and processing flows. So developing manufacturing, industrial processing and intra-African production. All this will only be a reality if the Pan-African Free Trade Area is put in place.
More than 40 African countries have ratified the African Continental Free Trade Area. On the ground, traders are hoping that non-tariff barriers will quickly be lifted so that the benefits can begin. For Anne Zwanke in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, Monkey Edwin Kinzaka for VOA News.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.